Right, so I guess you probably should see my screen now. And if you remember the last time I started talking about galaxies. And remember under galaxies, we talked a little bit about our own galaxy, which is the Milky Way. And then we talk about this debate that the people had around 1700, which is that they were not quite sure whether we have other galaxies in the universe or we are the only, or whether there is only one galaxy, which is our galaxy. And there was a debate about that. And as a result of this debate in 1920, people, as the astronomers, found about this Cepheid variable stars and used to measure the distances to different stars that they see. And what they found was this using the Cepheid stars, they discovered this period luminosity relation. And from the period luminosity relation, they were actually able to measure the distances to these different stars that they see in the sky. So what they found was, as a conclusion, that some of the stars, now we know this as Andromeda galaxy, actually belongs to the Andromeda galaxy. So they have discovered this using the Cepheid variable stars. So what I mean from that is they use Cepheid variable stars and this period luminosity relation right here to measure the distances to these different types of stars that they see using basically the Hubble. This is actually basically done by Edwin Hubble with his telescope, which is one of the largest telescopes at that time. And what he did was he found some of these Cepheid stars and then measured, and then he figured out that they belongs to different nebula. So they use this word nebula at that time because nobody knew that there are galaxies other than our own Milky Way. Now the measurements that he took is actually the Andromeda galaxy. So now we know that as Andromeda galaxy. Right, so that's what we talked last time. And then in brief, so I'm going to explain you different properties about the galaxies and the different classification schemes that we have for the galaxies. So what we know is basic composition of the galaxies. They contain interstellar matter and dark matter. And we know that they contain billions of stars inside the galaxies. And they basically held together by mutual gravitational attraction. So that's, in general, everybody knows about that. So there are a lot of matter inside there, a lot of masses. So they basically attract each other through gravity. And I guess I talk about these things as well, making the maps of the Milky Way. And at the beginning, they had this kind of map. And then what has happened, there was that Herschel assumed that all the stars at the same distance and made this map. But later, we identified that it is not the case. And then when you measure these distances to different stars, the extension comes into play. And then we talked about what is extension. And then we had these stars called RR Lyras, which is another type of variable star. And using these RR Lyra stars, they were able to make a three-dimensional map using globular clusters. And this is like the history of different findings about the galaxies. And then what we know now is that for the structure of the Milky Way, we basically have three distinct components. Now this is important. We have a galactic disk, and then we have a separate part called galactic bulge, and then there is a halo. And I guess I explained all these parts last time. And this picture basically clearly explains or give you an idea what galaxy, where is galactic center and where is the bulge and where is the halo. So this thing right here at the center, so this from the blue color, that is actually the bulge, and then you have this large spherical type of shape right here, that is the galactic halo, and then you have the disk right here, the flattened disk at the center right here in this region. And then at the same, you have galactic center right here. So basically you have three distinct components, as I mentioned here: disk, bulge, and halo. So these three distinct components are mentioned here, right? You can see it here in the diagram. And let me take so this is like an schematic representation of the galaxy, and you can see there are different arms. So our galaxy itself is a spiral galaxy. The left hand side image actually show a face on view. Face on view means if you go if you look at the galaxy from the upside, this is how you would see the shape of the galaxy. And the one in the right hand side is called the edge-on view of the galaxy. So that is how it looks like if you look at the galaxy along a disk. Now, when you look at the sky and make photographs of galaxies, you usually find all these both these types of galaxies, right? So it depends on the orientation of the galaxy. Now, let's look at how the stars move in the Milky Way, right? Now, each component of the Milky Way contains different mixture of stars. So we have, remember that different sections like the bulge and disk. So they have different mixtures of stars. Now in the halo and bulge stars, they orbit at the center of the galaxy. But the thing here is they orbit in random directions. Now these stars are often passed through the disk. But if you look at the disk, the stars also orbit at the center of the galaxy, but their orbits are more ordered, and they generally revolve in the same plane. And I have mentioned the sun is actually one of those stars that orbit in the galaxy. Basically, stars close to the center of the galaxy move more quickly. If you look at the sun is actually in one of these spiral arms in the Milky Way galaxy. The sun is actually orbiting at a speed of 240 kilometers per second. And sun orbits the Milky Way every 240 million years. So this is roughly like the period, right? Now remember that when we talk about our own solar system, we used to tell that all the planets are moving around sun, right? But what we are talking here is the orbit of the sun around the center of the Milky Way. So every 240 million years, it complete an orbit. So that's the idea, right? So this picture again shows you everything that I have explained you, and you can see that the stars as mentioned here in the disk stars, which are the stars in this light blue region. So they are kind of moving in an ordered direction. But if you look at the stars in the halo and bulge, so these stars, they are actually not in an ordered direction. So they are randomly moving here and there, right? Right. Now, so one thing that is very interesting is, I think I have mentioned this before as well. The central region of our Milky Way's bulge is called the nucleus, very central region that you probably, I guess you have remembered this picture that I have showed you before. This region contains a very high density of stars, right? And looks like looks very unusual in different wavelengths, and there are a lot of studies that have going on. So I'm basically talking about this region right here in the central region. So if you look at the central region, this is actually called the nucleus, and this region has a high density of stars. The number of stars are larger, and they are showing very different behaviors at different wavelengths. Basically, if you look at optical wavelengths, it is very difficult to see. That is because we are looking through a lot of dust. Remember that if you need to visualize, our solar system is actually in one of these arms in the spiral galaxy, which we live in. So when we need to look at the central region of the galaxy, we are basically have to look through a lot of dust, right? Remember that I told you there are a lot of dust particles in between the stars. Because of that, through the optical light, it is very hard to see something that is close to the center. But there are certain wavelengths that are less susceptible to extinction. Even you have dust, you can see through those wavelengths. So one wavelength is infrared. Because of that, observation of stars close to the center of nucleus indicate basically through the infrared wavelengths that they are orbiting at very high speeds, right? So this is something very important when you look through the infrared wavelengths at the central region. And if you observe the movement of stars, what we see is that these stars that are close to the center of the galaxy actually moving in very high speeds. Now, if you observe the same region using a radio observations, which means through radio wavelengths, that indicates that there is the presence of a very bright radio source. And we used to tell the name for that, we have named that as Sagittarius A, right? And if you combine these two observations that are coming from the center through these wavelengths about the central region of our galaxy, what this indicates is that the nucleus harbors a supermassive black hole with a mass of 4.5 million solar mass. So once again, this should be, I guess, a solar mass for some reason. So this is actually, from these details, you can even conclude the mass of the black hole, which is at the central region of our Milky Way, right? So these are the observations that tells that there is a supermassive black hole at the central region of our galaxy, right? So this is just a few images from different wavelengths in our galaxy. This is an optical view. And this is once again Sagittarius A, which is what we believe as the supermassive black hole. And this image actually taken from very large array radio telescopes. And this shows radio emission from the ionized gas at the center of the Milky Way. And this region right here is the central region of the galaxy. This is what we called as Sagittarius A, which is the bright spot on the central region of the galaxy. And this is another radio image about the galactic central region. And just there are a lot of things that you can get by reading through this caption. And since it is there, I'm not going to explain it too much at this point. Just go through it. And the image is basically taken from the VLA, which is called as Very Large Array of Radio Telescopes in New Mexico. Right. So this one again, which I have took from the book. And this is an NIR, near infrared view of the galactic center. And this is using actually Keck telescopes, right? So all these informations are actually just to give you an idea how astronomers observe the same region using different wavelengths, and how they acquire all this information about what is inside what is close to the central region of the galaxy and those kind of stuff. So what you need to understand here is it's not only about optical telescopes that astronomers use in astronomy. So optical telescopes are the more popular and most established way of looking at sky. But when you do research, you use all other wavelengths and different telescopes. And there are telescopes to observe gamma X-rays, and there are telescopes for the radio waves, which we called as radio telescopes, and there are IR telescopes, those kind of stuff. Right, so let's see now. Here is a way of actually estimating the mass of our own galaxy. Now, remember that what we have been talking here is different properties of our galaxy. So we said that there are three main parts of the galaxy, and we discussed properties of each section of the galaxy and behavior of stars, and then we move on to the central region of the galaxy, and we show some evidences that tells us that there is a supermassive black hole at the central region of the galaxy. Now, let's see how we can get an idea about the mass of our own galaxy. Now, I'm going to use here a very simple equation using the modified Kepler's third law, right? I assume that you probably have learned it in your first few lectures, but even though if you haven't, this is basically the equation roughly, right? So the mass can be approximated by radius to the power 3 divided by period squared, right? Now the only thing is when you plug some values here, you need to make sure that you use proper units. The radius is normally plugged in terms of astronomical units, like that. So if you think about, remember that I told you that our own sun is in one of these arms in the Milky Way, and what we know is that sun orbits once every 240 million years, which means we know the period of our own sun around the galaxy. And what we also know is the radius of the orbit of the sun, which is 26,000 light years. So once we know these two information, you can plug the radius here and the period here. So if you know these two values, the radius and the period, you can directly estimate the mass of the Milky Way. But remember that when you estimate the mass of the Milky Way in this way, this is actually an underestimation, which means you can't get the total mass. The reason is the sun is not at the edge of the Milky Way. It is actually in one of those arms. Even though it calculates a considerable amount of mass, it is not the whole complete mass of the Milky Way. So if you do the calculation in this way, it gives you that the mass of the Milky Way is approximately 10 to the power 11 solar masses once again. So you can see how huge is our Milky Way up to the position where you have the sun from the center. And this is basically equivalent to 100 billion suns, right? Right, but there are some material beyond the sun's orbit, right? Which means there are some stars and star clusters that you can see out to distances of about even 50,000 light years, which means far away from the sun's orbit. And their orbits indicate that the total enclosed mass is around 2 times 10 to the power 11. So it's roughly twice what we get just by considering the sun. Now the question is there anything further out apart from this material that we see? Now, while there is very little visible matter further out, so if you go for further outer region, and this is specifically applied for this halo region actually, there is small amount of gas outside this region. And one thing that I would like to remind here is when you have this gases, the easy way of, or one way of detecting the gases is looking at 21 centimeter hydrogen line. If you remember, we talked about this when we were talking about this star, different ways of detecting interstellar matter. So it applies here as well. Now using 21 centimeter hydrogen, the 21 centimeter line, you can actually measure the rotation speed of those matter which is outside and at the outer region of the halo part of the galaxy. Now, normally what we expect is, and you can, I guess you can guess from yourself as well, when you go towards the outer region of the galaxy from the center, the density of matter usually decreases. So what we would expect is, close to the center, you will should have larger rotation speeds, and when you go a little bit outer region, especially to the edge of the galaxy, we expect that the speeds will decrease, right? So this is what we would expect from our normal understanding. But the problem is, surprisingly, the rotation speeds are actually instead found to increase slightly out to distance of 100,000 light years. This, the 100,000 light years means very close to the edge of the galaxy, specifically that halo part that you see in that, what do you call this, that you see in that picture that I showed you for the different parts of the galaxy. Now, this is where actually we conclude that there may be some matter that we can't see in this halo part, and this matter may contribute to this increased rotational speed in the outer region of the galaxy. Now, this matter that which is a type of unseen component, now we call that as dark matter, and this is where this term called dark matter comes in, right? Remember, you may have heard about this dark matter and dark energy stuff, and this is how we concluded that there is dark matter in the universe, specifically in these halo parts of the galaxy. And here is the actual curve that I was mentioning in the previous slide, and you can see that this dotted line right here, this is what someone would expect using the normal matter, which means the visible matter. When you look at, there is matter that you can see. As you see, here is the central region of the galaxy right here. This region is the central region, and then, excuse me, and you can clearly see that even from this picture, the density of visible matter is decreasing towards this direction, right? And this axis is actually the distance from the center of the galaxy in terms of light years. When it goes up to 40,000 and 50,000 light years, the density of visible matter is decreasing, right? And what we expect is, when the matter is decreasing, this rotational curve should go down like this. But what we actually observed is, you have observations up to right here from the starlight, and then once you measure through this 21 centimeter hydrogen line, because we have a lot of gas outside or close to the in the halo, you have seen, what we have seen is that there is an increase in the rotational speed, and this difference of these two curves cannot be explained using normal matter. And this is where we predict that the dark matter exists in the halo part, specifically in the halo part of the galaxy, right? And another measurement that we use to take for the galaxy is mass to light ratio. And this also tells you, once you measure the mass to light ratio, this also tells you the amount of light that if the mass to light ratio is higher, then you can tell that that comes from the dark matter. Now, as I mentioned, here is a useful way of characterizing a galaxy is by noting that the ratio of its mass to light output. So this is basically the mass to light ratio, means you take the ratio of the mass of the galaxy to the amount of light it is emitting, right? And this is measured in terms of the units of the sun's luminosity. And for stars like the sun, which are normal stars that is in the main sequence, So these main sequence stars basically produce their energy by burning hydrogen into helium, which means you can see all of the light coming from that. So the mass to light ratio is roughly will be equal to 1 by, sorry, now for the sun, the definition is mass to light ratio is 1, right? So that's our definition. And which means you don't expect that there is something invisible. Basically, the prediction is for the sun, the amount of mass that we measure is same as the amount of light. So basically, this is mass to light ratio is 1 for our sun. And then if you look at the galaxies in which the star formation is still occurring, have many massive stars. So remember that when you look at the galaxies, there are some galaxies that active star formation is still going on. And if you look at these type of stars, they have a lot of massive stars, and the mass to light ratio is usually in the range between 1 and 10 for these galaxies where you have active star forming regions, a lot of active star forming regions. And also you will see in coming slides, for the galaxies we can divide the galaxies into different categories, and there is a set of galaxies we used to tell as elliptical galaxies. You probably have heard this before as well. And there is another type of galaxies, another category of galaxies we used to tell as spiral galaxies. Now, for example, our own galaxy is a spiral galaxy, but there are other galaxies which has these elliptical shapes, which we called as elliptical galaxies. Now, if you look at these two types of galaxies, there is a difference in the star formation as well. Normally, so what astronomers has found from their research is that most of these elliptical galaxies actually have an older stellar population, which means the stars are relatively old in these elliptical galaxies. This is in general true, but there may be exceptions. So what that means is, if you have old stars, that means that these massive stars they have inside these elliptical galaxies have already completed their evolution of stars and have ceased shine, which means most of these probably they have gone out from the main sequence, right? What that means is there is not a whole lot of light, so which means the mass to light ratio should increase around 10 to 20 for these elliptical galaxies. Now it is important to keep these numbers roughly in your mind, at least just get an idea that mass to light ratio for galaxies that have higher star formation regions, or with where you have galaxies that have star formation activities going on, their mass to light ratio is usually in the range of 1 to 10. But if you get elliptical galaxies which has older stellar population, their mass to light ratio is usually from 10 to 20, so which is a little bit larger. Now, another one important thing here is these numbers that I talked up here actually refer only the inner part of the galaxy. So we are not considering the outer halo part. Just looking at inner part of the galaxy, we can categorize that if you have galaxies that have star formation, active star formation regions are still occurring, so their mass to light ratio is around 1 to 10. For old elliptical galaxies with older stellar population, their mass to light ratio is roughly 10 to 20. But if you think about this outer region, which means that if dark invisible matter is present in the galaxy, mass to light ratio can be as high as 100, because there are a lot of matter that you can't see. They don't emit light, which means you have higher mass, smaller light. So the mass to light ratio goes up to 100. So it's important that you have a rough idea about these mass to light ratio values. At least make sure that you have in your mind that larger mass to light ratio such as 100, something like 100 comes into play when you consider dark matter, right? Right. So this diagram basically explains some of the details about different types of galaxies, and in a minute, in the next slide, you will see that there are basically three types of galaxies: spirals, ellipticals, and irregulars, depending on their shape. And actually, these galaxies are also subdivided into different parts. But in general, for the spiral galaxies, such as our own Milky Way, the mass of these spiral galaxies roughly around 10 to the power 9 to 10 to the power 12 solar masses. Remember, these numbers are in terms of solar masses. And elliptical galaxies, normally you have 10 to the power 5 to 10 to the power 13. So you can see that you can't differentiate the galaxies depending on the type of the galaxy, depending on its mass. There are high mass, both high mass and low mass galaxies. And if you look at the diameter of these galaxies, spirals have 15 to 150 thousands of light years, but for the ellipticals, you sometimes have even very large elliptical galaxies in terms of their size. You can see it can go up to greater than 700 thousands of light years. And irregulars, it's just not that much large. They are 3 to 30, between 3 and 30 thousand light years. And in terms of the luminosity, you can see that the spiral galaxies are a little bit in the higher side of the luminosity, so that's why their mass light ratio is a little bit lower. And ellipticals, roughly around that range, but they are a bit less in some of the spiral galaxies. And irregulars has a different value right here. And if you consider about the population of stars, this is something very important that you can keep in mind. Normally, spiral galaxies have both old and young stars, and that's why they are a little bit brighter. But if you look at the elliptical galaxies, most of the time these elliptical galaxies have older stellar population, right? And irregulars, you can't tell it specifically. Again, you have both old and young, and what you can notice here is specifically about elliptical galaxies, most of the time they contain older stellar population, right? And then you can have look at these values about the interstellar matter, what you have as the interstellar matter. And then here you have the mass to light ratio in the visible part, only the visible part. If you take the visible light, elliptical galaxies have a little bit higher mass to light ratio than the spirals. But if you look at the mass to light ratio for the total galaxy, which means considering this halo part, including the dark matter, the both values seems to be the same, right? And because we want to include the dark matter, which tells you that there are a lot of dark matter than normal matter inside these galaxies, right? So that makes a huge contribution to the galaxy. Right, so let's look at what is this dark matter, right? What current measurement indicates for us is that the 90% of the Milky Way matter is dark matter. Now, what this means is 90% about the 90% of the Milky Way we don't know, because only what the research that we have been done in the past now, like in actually the past century, is basically about the visible matter. And however, the 90% of the matter is dark matter in our own Milky Way. And if you think about what is this dark matter, that cannot be normal stars or interstellar matter, because if they are normal stars or interstellar matter, then we should be able to detect those, right? Because we have been talking about how to detect interstellar matter and also stars and those kind of stars, those kind of stars. So if you have stars or interstellar matter, you can detect those. So this dark matter cannot be normal stars or interstellar matter. And one suggestion came out that maybe the dark matter is stellar mass black holes. Maybe remember that I talked about different types of black holes previously. And one way of thinking about the dark matter is that maybe the dark matter contains stellar mass black holes. So that's why we can't see those. We can't see black holes, no. I mean, of course, there are evidences, but you cannot directly see those. And but the problem is, see that the 90% of them are dark matter, which means we can probably cannot explain just using the stellar mass black hole, because these objects are thought to be relatively rare. Black holes are not everywhere, no, these are rare objects. Now we cannot account 90% of the matter into the stellar mass black holes due to this region. And another way of thinking about the dark matter is assume that maybe they are brown dwarf. And remember that I talked about brown dwarf before. The brown dwarfs are failed stars, which means if you have a star roughly less than the 8% of the mass of the sun, when they try to enter to the main sequence, they don't have enough mass to burn hydrogen into helium. Basically, they don't create enough temperature, which means they will never enter to the main sequence, and they are very faint objects, and we also call them as failed stars. And some astronomers thought that maybe these are the brown dwarf that we can't see because they are not that much luminous. But it is very unlikely that then all these 90% can be accounted for brown dwarf, right? Because there are a lot of them, but we don't see that much amount of brown dwarfs normally from our observation. So that rules out as well. And another way of thinking about dark matter is maybe these are very faint white dwarfs. So there are different suggestions like that, but none of these are certain, or none of these haven't actually confirmed as dark matter candidates, right? So that's about the dark matter inside the galaxies. And now if I move on to different classifications of the galaxies, actually Edwin Hubble is the one who actually pioneered in this galaxy classification, and he derived or classified galaxies basically into three categories called spiral, ellipticals, and irregulars. So that's what you have seen in previous slides as well. And he has something called Hubble tuning fork classification, which is this right here. So let me directly go into this diagram of the Hubble tuning fork classification. This one right here. So I just jumped to this particular position, and this is his classification. Basically, he has a spiral galaxies in this region. It's basically the just like the shape is looks like a tuning fork. So what he has was spiral galaxies in this region, and in the arm of the tuning fork, you have different types of elliptical galaxies. Those are the two main categories that he put on this tuning fork diagram. But apart from these two types, there are irregular type galaxies, which means the shape is not quite certain. So they have like different irregular shapes, and they have a different category which you can't see here. But if you look at the internet for the Hubble tuning fork diagram, there are some diagrams that have this irregular shape uh, also drawn in the diagram around this region right here. And apart from due inside this classification, actually depending on the ellipticity or the elongation of the galaxies, Hubble has classified elliptical galaxies into different categories like E0, E3, E5, E7, like that. And you can see that, for example, if you go to the E0 galaxies, E0s are actually uh, less elongated compared to E7. E7 has a high ellipticity, right? And for the spiral galaxies in this arm and this arm, you have both spiral galaxies, but you can see that the galaxies in this arm right here, there is a bar at the center of the galaxy. Here is a bar right here, and here is a bar. Here is a bar like that. So basically, spiral galaxies are divided into two sides of the fork, depending on whether whether a particular galaxy has a bar or not. So these galaxies has a bar, so they are called as barred spirals, right? And these are just other spiral galaxies, right? So these are the categories, and all these. So I just moved ahead, and I probably have put that slide right here. So all these galaxies in that diagram, I have explained their properties and everything in these slides. Basically, the spiral galaxies, they contain flattened disk, and this contains spiral patterns of stars and interstellar matter. And basically, spiral galaxies also contains a bulge and a halo, and the appearance of the spiral galaxies depend on its orientation. There are some galaxies that are edge on, and there are some on face on. So that's what I mentioned previously as well. And the image in this left hand side, so that is actually face on spiral galaxies, which means you can clearly see the spiral arms. But if you observe the galaxy in this orientation, that is called as an edge-on galaxy. If it is an edge-on galaxy, then you can't see the spiral arms because the orientation is different, and you are looking from from like a cross section of the galaxy, so that not actually a cross section even. It's basically, I guess you can understand if you rotate this left hand image by 90 degrees and look at it, then you cannot see these spiral arms, right? And also, as you saw in that diagram, uh, each spiral arm category is subdivided into three types, A, B, and C type. That's based on different properties, right? So SA type spirals have the largest bulges and mostly tightly wound spiral arms, and the B type is moderately wound, and C type is loosely wound spiral arms. So what that means is, if I go back to that image in the Hubble tuning fork diagram, you can see that the shape of the spiral arms, some of the spiral arms are actually tightly wound, and when you go up to SC, these are actually very loosely bound or loosely wound spiral arms. So that's how you categorize A, B, and C. And then again, for the same category, when you have a bar, it goes as SBA, SBB, and SBC. So these are barred spirals. We call that as barred spirals, and these are unbarred spirals. So let me go back again. Yeah, so these are the three types, and here are like different spiral galaxies, and you can see the category. It has, I have mentioned the category as well. This is SA type, and this is SB and SC. And you can see in this picture, the spiral arms, you can't even see the spiral arms because they are very tightly wound together. But if you go to the left hand side, and this one, you can clearly see that the spiral arms are distinct, which means you can clearly identify the arms because they are very loosely bound, right? And again, some spiral arms have a feature called bar. So that's what I have mentioned. The bar basically made of stars and interstellar matter. And I guess since I have a limited time, so I'm going to go through this a little bit quickly. So just make sure that you read through and identify these specific features of the spiral galaxies. And this is one example of a very famous spiral galaxy. This is called Pinwheel Galaxy, or M101. And this is a face-on spiral galaxy around 21 million light years away from us. And this is a barred spiral galaxy, and you can clearly see this bar, right? Sometimes students used to ask, where is the bar from me? So this structure like the bar is somewhere right here, and sometimes you can't see it straight away, but when you get used to it, you will see that there is a bar structure. And what happens here is basically spiral now begins at the end of the bar, right? From here and here. So that's how the barred spirals work. So that's about spiral galaxies. And the elliptical galaxy is the second major Hubble type, which is that you see in the tuning fork diagram. And elliptical galaxy is also subdivided into depending on its elongation. Circular type is called E0. So you can see circular type basically denote E0. and then the most elongated ellipticals are E7, right? And in between that, there are categories from type E1 to E6, and some of them you have probably seen in that diagram as well. And elliptical galaxies, as you know, they don't have spiral structures, and they are stars inside this elliptical galaxies orbit in random directions. And here are two elliptical galaxies. This one right here is a very giant elliptical galaxy. And there are two other elliptical galaxies. There is one right here. And there are other elliptical. This is a galaxy right here. And this is a galaxy right here. So all these are actually galaxies. But this one right here is a very giant galaxy. And this fuzzy shape that you see from here to here. So this is actually basically that halo region that contains a lot of dark matter. I mean this region right here, this region. So this region is what we called as normally the halo, which actually contains most of this dark matter. And what we believe is that, so there are a lot of research that are going on the formation of these galaxies. And elliptical galaxies, actually we sometimes think that these galaxies are originated from the collisions of two spiral galaxies. And these evidence come from images like this, and it seems like the two spiral galaxies are merging right here to make a elliptical galaxy. So there are these kind of evidences, and these are different elliptical type galaxies with different orientations. And this is a dwarf elliptical galaxy M32. The dwarf elliptical galaxy means when you have this word dwarf galaxies, you will see that in coming slides as well. So this is actually dwarf galaxy means dwarf galaxies are normally relatively faint in terms of their brightness, and they have a less mass as well. So that depends on the way that we categorize the galaxies according to the Hubble tuning fork diagram is depending on their shapes. But there is a second way of categorizing galaxies depending on the mass and the brightness. We used to tell that the high mass and the bright galaxies as giant galaxies, and then there are galaxies that has low mass and the brightness is smaller. We call those galaxies as dwarf galaxies. Remember that we have these other white dwarf stars before, right? So that's a different story. But here the dwarf galaxies means relatively faint galaxies. And the third type is irregular galaxies. So just go through and read this section about the irregular galaxies. You will understand it. So I have just mentioned the properties. The idea is that the irregular galaxies is like any regular structure, such as bulges or spiral arms that I have mentioned here. These galaxies actually have plenty of interstellar matter to form new stars and those kind of stuff. So make sure that you go through the slide and read this to understand different properties. So there is nothing special that I want to explain. These are just different pictures. And one thing is important is remember that there is a different type of galaxy that we did not talk right here in this tuning fork diagram, which we called as S0 type galaxies. Actually, these S0 type galaxies has a distinct shape, and they don't, it doesn't belong to either of these categories, elliptical or spiral. So that I would like to talk about that separately. And there is one remaining class of galaxies. So they are called S0, and there is another name for that, lenticular galaxies. And these galaxies lie midway between elongated ellipticals and bulge-dominated spirals. So that means it's basically between ellipticals and spirals. Sorry. Right. So these, they actually have a thin disk of stars. So they have a very thin disk. This contains very little interstellar matter and contain mostly older stars. and they do not have spiral arms. Many of may or may not contain a bar, or some of them have a bar and some of them don't. And sometimes actually it is very difficult to distinguish between the S0 and elliptical galaxies. Especially if a galaxy is face on, you cannot easily decide whether this is an S0 or elliptical, right? And actually these type of galaxies, for the formation of S0 galaxies are not that much studies. So people are studying the formation of these galaxies actually in through different types of research actually. And we are also carrying out one of those kind of research to study about these formation of S0 type galaxies by modeling those, right? And so that's about the Hubble classification of galaxies and different properties of the galaxies in the Hubble tuning fork diagram and how they are classified. So make sure that you go through these notes and understand. And let me see whether I have, right? I guess I don't have time to finish off all these things as time is 6:55 now. And let me just go through the dwarfs and giant galaxies. As I told you, that previous way of categorizing galaxies is one way of doing that, using Hubble tuning fork diagram by looking at different characteristics and the shape of the galaxies. But another popular way of categorizing the galaxies into two different categories is called giants and dwarfs, right? So this is basically depends on two things: size of the galaxy and the mass of the galaxy. Normally, the larger galaxies, they referred as giant galaxies. And okay, so I guess I have to stop the lecture right now. My battery is draining down, so I'm going to stop from here. And let me stop the slide. And